Serve Jamaica program, care program. There's a whole lot going on in this year's budget. I'm Kalila Reynolds, and today I'll be talking to the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Dr. Nigel Clarke, to find out what's in it for me. The Ministry of Finance, in collaboration with Kalila Reynolds Media, present What's in It for Me. Follow at MOF Jamaica on social media. Hi, Minister. It's good to see you as usual.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Let me first of all, I'm wearing AirPods, not for style, but simply because it is. I've been advised it's better audio, right, for the production.
Yes. Yes, that is true. That is true. Both the audio quality from you and the listening experience for the public, it is better. So thank you for wearing your AirPods.
But I want people to understand it's not motivated by style.
No, I don't think anybody would think that.
Okay,
but anyway, let's get down to business. So I haven't had a chance to speak to you since your budget presentation back in March. So there are quite a few things to go over. Let's start with the Serve Jamaica program, and Serve stands for Social and Economic Recovery and Vaccine Program. It is a very big program. So just break down what are the different components.
Sure. So we're focused on social and economic recovery at this time. And the Serve Jamaica program is a $60 billion program financed in part by a $30 billion dividend from the Bank of Jamaica. It consists of a number of elements, and I'll just summarize them for you very quickly. The first element is a $31 billion infrastructure program where we will be engaging in infrastructure development to promote jobs and economic recovery. The South Coast Highway, which is going to extend from Harborview all the way down to Port Antonio, it will be 4 lanes for 16 miles from Harborview, and then after that it will be 2 lanes. Will absorb a lot of that, or most of that expenditure. But in addition, there'll be an $8 billion, inclusive in the 31, major infrastructure works that will be similar to what we did in Barbican Road and Manor Park for certain segments around the country. I don't know if people would have seen the works that have begun in certain sections of the corporate area that are a part of that $8 billion outlay. In addition to that $31 billion infrastructure spend, there are amounts of $6 billion allocated to the Ministry of Health to procure vaccines, because without vaccines, there's no recovery. So we have that allocation put aside. In addition to that, we have a number of other elements that are smaller in size, but they consist of $3 billion to continue the Set Cash program for the months of April, May, and June, to be paid in June, July, and August. We have programmed funds to provide an incentive for elderly persons to be vaccinated at $10,000 per person over the age of 60 who are fully vaccinated by the Ministry of Health. We also have a number of programs such as the Paint the City program, over $300 million that is earmarked for municipalities to repair sidewalks, to repair parks, and as well to establish murals in urban areas that can serve as points of attraction for Jamaicans and for people who visit our cities. And also programs such as river training program, approximately $130 million for river training that will absorb a lot of labor in rural areas and provide environmental protection. And one of the most important elements, approximately $325 million to provide digital devices through members of parliament and through councillors. That's over 10,000 digital devices through members of parliament, an additional several thousand, I can't remember the exact number, through municipal corporations. So in total, a $60 billion program: infrastructure, health, jobs and economic recovery, vaccines, vaccine incentives, as well as and unemployment support under the Set Cash program. So a wide range of programs and activities under the Serve Jamaica program. And how could I forget, Kalila, one of the one, a very important element, $1 billion in the Serve Jamaica program to support medium, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to transition to a digital platform to acquire online capabilities. Through the Development Bank of Jamaica, MSMEs who qualify will be able to access up to 1 million Jamaican dollars, consisting of $200,000 in a grant that you don't have to pay back, and $800,000 in a loan to acquire the nuggets that would allow your business to transition to online capabilities. And that through that program, the DBJ will set up those MSMEs with pre-approved providers of those kinds of services. So in all, it's a very broad and deep
wide-ranging program,
$60 billion economic and social recovery.
Yeah. So how does one apply for that, the last one that you mentioned for the MSMEs? Where do you go?
That program is administered by the Development Bank of Jamaica. It's called their Go Digital program. And you go through the DBJ, through the Development Bank of Jamaica.
It's open already?
It's open already, yes.
Okay. Let's look at the vaccination component of Serve Jamaica. I know that $10,000 incentive begins soon in July. Yes. I think July 15, I saw.
Correct.
You recently removed the requirement, that minimum income or maximum income of 1.5 million Jamaican dollars in order to benefit. Why?
Right. So when we announced it in the budget, we announced the program that would provide $10,000 to all Jamaicans over the age of 60 who are fully vaccinated. At the time of the budget, I announced that it would only be eligible for persons who earn less than $1.5 million a year. Now, when I did that, it came across as a social program, and we were conditioning the social program that people get vaccinated to get a social benefit, which is completely the opposite of the intention. It's not a social program. It's a vaccine incentive program. And the way in which that is best communicated is to say that everybody who is over age 60, regardless of how much they earn, they would get the incentive too. Otherwise, it gets confused, and the public acceptance of the incentive is not as great because people perceive it to be some kind of social incentive, and you're saying to get the social benefit, you must be vaccinated. Mm-hmm. And that's not what the intention is. The intention is we want everybody to be vaccinated, and we're giving an incentive for you to do so.
But there are people, despite this change, there are people who still believe that an incentive to get vaccinated is unethical. What do you say to that?
Well, here's what I say to that. I say that the data show that 75% of the persons who have died from COVID-19 up to the 5th of June were over 60 years old. 75%. Even though those over 60 are only 14% of the population. I'll give you another statistic. Of all the people under 60 who contract COVID, 0.6% have a fatal experience, i.e. 0.6% die. That corresponding number for persons over 60 who contract COVID is that 8% have passed, which means that the fatality rate over 60 is 13 times as high. Now, although the over 60 population, again, is only 14% of the Jamaican population, there are 370,000 persons over the age of 60, they make up 50% of the hospitalizations. And Kalila, that we have these restrictive measures because we have to keep the hospital population down. We have to make sure it does not overwhelm the health system of Jamaica. The only way to sustainably do that is to ensure that this vulnerable group, who constitute a majority of the persons in hospital, that they are protected. And so there is a public interest in ensuring that the vulnerable category of persons over 60, that they are protected from the coronavirus. You, I'm sure, want the economy to open up. You want the measures to gradually be lifted, the path to doing so is to ensure that the vulnerable population, that they are vaccinated. And this incentive program is aligned with that objective.
Yet only 2% of Jamaica's elderly have been vaccinated despite the incentive and despite
Well,
giving them priority.
To be fair, the incentive is just going to
Well,
be
yes.
launched now, right? But that, yeah, I want to be sort of clear on that. Remember that up until recently, the government has just been issuing the first shot. So I believe the number for the first shot is about 150,000 people overall, and over 40,000 elderly have gotten their first shot. But it's also the case that only 7,000 of the elderly have gotten the second shot. So only 7,000 persons over the age of 60 have been fully vaccinated, which means we have a long way to go. We have 350,000 persons over the age of 60. You want to get up. I mean, I've heard the Ministry of Health, speak about figures like 60% and 65% and so forth. We have a long way to go from the 7,000, and we want to, get many more persons over the age of 60 being fully vaccinated, which in the case...
And to be fair as well, you only recently started administering the second shot.
Right, to be fair, and the way in which the newspaper reported today was very unfair, because that's absolutely the case. The second shot only started very, very recently. I mean, as in, if not a week ago, less than 2 weeks ago, the second shot.
Right.
So 7,000 in that time frame is decent, but we want to accelerate and to ensure that those over the age of 60 make themselves available for their first and second shots in as far as AstraZeneca vaccine is concerned. And if we do get other vaccines that have one shot, then that one shot would constitute, being fully vaccinated.
Right. All right. So we've gone over the SERVE program. You're also reopening the CARE program. Who are the beneficiaries for that?
Right. So the CARE program, we have an unemployment support element of it. That's called the Set Cash program, and the Best Cash program, which also supports persons being employed. And remember, these programs are for persons who earned less than the income tax threshold. We are making 3 more payments for the months for persons who still remained unemployed in April, May, and June. And those payments will be made in June, July, and August. And these are payments of $18,000 a month. And again, it's for persons who remained unemployed. In total, 55,000 persons have benefited on a monthly basis up until now. And we're budgeting for that number to continue. It might be the case that some of those persons who have benefited are now on a payroll and therefore would not qualify. But we're going through the exercise that all persons who qualify can get another 3 payments, which would bring Kalila to 12 months. It would make 12 months of temporary unemployment support for over 55,000 people by the government of Jamaica due to the conditions brought on by COVID. And just for your listeners to understand that, this is a particularly, the persons who were employed formally and who lost their jobs have been particularly hard hit. And given a lot of those job losses came from tourism, but in other sectors as well, in restaurants and quick service establishments. And their communities where not one person in the community, not 2, but 10, 15, 20 persons have lost jobs. And, the predicament and the risk that introduces goes beyond the economic. There's a social dimension there that's very important. And to ensure that these communities don't fall into dislocation, it's critically important that we have had the space and the opportunity to provide this support, and we're renewing that effort over the next 3 months.
Now, I forgot to ask about the vaccine incentive program. Where do people go to sign up if they want to collect their $10,000 and they've gotten both their jabs?
So importantly, the applications will open on the 15th of July. And those applications will open on the WeCare website, which is www.wecare.gov.jm. It is not open now. It will open on July 15th. You will be required to put in your first and last name, your TRN, your date of birth, and some information from the vaccination card that you received when you were vaccinated. And that information will allow you to be verified. Oh, you'll also put in your preferred method of payment with only two options, by a remittance company or at a banking institution, a commercial bank. And if you don't know your bank account, don't put it in. Or if you don't have a bank account in your own name, go for a remittance company. As we found last year, you can't put your grandchild's name or your niece's name or your niece's bank account rather. It has to be a bank account in your own name. And if you don't have one, then you put a remittance company and you go and you collect it from that company.
Mm-hmm. I was just reading today that Jamaica's net international reserves, the NIR, basically the money that you keep in at the Bank of Jamaica for an emergency, basically, that's up by $100 million US. How come?
Well, the NIR, first of all, that's a question best posed for the governor of the central bank. But my opinion on it is that the NIR has been performing creditably over the course of this pandemic and still stands at levels that are not met or have not been reached at any other point in our history. And that's good news. Kalila, the framework that we have with a flexible exchange rate is a very important part of that. And also, give credit where it's due, we have seen a big rise in remittances, which is important. And that has been sustained throughout the pandemic. But you might want to ask the governor for more details.
Right, because we know that the central bank is now independent from the government. So you really have nothing to do with it as Minister of Finance, right?
Correct. Right. The policy is our policy, i.e.
Right.
The policy of inflation targeting and a flexible exchange rate and an independent central bank is the policy of the government of Jamaica. But if you want details, you can get further details from the central bank.
Right. So we're now at $3.42 billion worth of reserves, the highest level in history, 30 weeks of imports. And that's good news for the economy. Before the pandemic, you mentioned in the opening budget presentation that cash reserves were crucial to keeping debt down. Could you explain that in more detail?
Right. So we would have entered the pandemic with extra sort of cash resources, over $90 billion, that were primarily raised from the privatization of state enterprises. And we had intended to use those funds to accelerate the pay down on debt that would give us more fiscal space over the medium term. They say that preparation is better than good luck. And when our revenues declined in the last fiscal year and declined by over nearly 13 or 14%, over $80 billion, we were able to draw upon these cash resources along with a lower primary balance target to continue to keep the train running on time, so to speak, to continue to pay the expenses of government and to provide an extra $40 billion of resources that were, or not 40, nearly 50 billion of resources that were necessary to respond to the crisis in the form of support to the Ministry of Health, in the form of the CARE program, in the form of supporting public bodies and other such expenditures. So under other circumstances, if we never had those cash reserves, what would have happened under the pandemic when our revenues catered in is that we would have had to borrow. And that borrowing would have increased debt.
Understood. But we still did borrow from the IMF because funds from the IMF have boosted the cash reserves, haven't they?
Well, those funds have not entered the fiscal accounts, right? So they, we did draw down on the rapid financing facility, $500 million, which sit in the central bank in cash. Okay, so that's different from sort of borrowing to go and spend. if you understand what I'm saying. So the fiscal accounts, we never engaged in much net new borrowing to finance the operations of government.
But I was reading some comments under a news article about the same topic, about the NIR and it being the highest in Jamaica's history. And a lot of people who were commenting were saying, well, how can the government or the BOJ be sitting on the highest levels of reserves in history when we're still in a crisis and the dollar is at 150? Shouldn't they be doing more?
Doing more like what? What do you mean?
Well, the argument, I suppose, is that the BOJ, and again, you are not the central bank governor, but I put it to you, you may have an opinion on it, that the BOJ should be intervening, should be using those reserves to intervene more in the market.
Well, as you put it in one of your questions earlier, the reserves of the central bank exist to support Jamaica in times of crisis when we do not have inflows of foreign exchange. And we went through that period last year. Foreign exchange inflows are beginning to return. But remember, last year, our inflows of foreign exchange went to a 30-year low. We used to earn in excess of $2.5, $3 billion a year in inflows from tourism. And that number collapsed to just several $100 million, so collapsed by over $2 billion. And Jamaica was still able to meet its bills, right? Manufacturers and those who import were still able to pay their suppliers. And that's why the reserves exist. The reserves do not exist to provide a subsidy, because that subsidy can be eaten away very, very quickly. And then when you need reserves to support the temporary interruption in inflows of foreign exchange, you don't have them, right? So the policy is a flexible exchange rate, where demand and supply determine what the rate is at any particular time, and our reserves are used to provide stability. And it's that stability. You notice that during the crisis, interest rates have remained. We never had any. In previous crises, one of the first things that would have happened, that interest rates would have been adjusted upwards very quickly in order to stem capital flight and to keep things in check. That was not necessary at this time because of the policy choices that we have made and the fact that those policy choices have kept the economy stable during the worst crisis in 100 years.
During your budget presentation, another thing that you also announced was that the pilot phase of central bank digital currency, basically the digital version of the Jamaican dollar, would begin very soon, I believe June. We're in June now. Is there any update you can give us on where we are with that?
Yes, so what we have to first do is to change the legislation, the Bank of Jamaica Act, to give the central bank the sole and exclusive authority to issue central bank digital currency. We're still in the phase of preparing the amendments to the act, and they're under review, law reform review, attorney general review, and so forth. I hope in a matter of a few months to be able to take that legislation to Parliament and to amend the BOJ Act.
Has the pilot begun?
No, the pilot requires the act to be amended, and as usual, that is a bottleneck and has always been a bottleneck. The drafting of legislation and the review of that legislation. In the Ministry of Finance and the central bank, we have kind of done our part in that the drafts have been prepared, and we are awaiting comments from other parts of government.
I see. I thought they could just test it without the law being changed because it's not really being used yet.
Well, no, to test it, you have to issue it you test it with a few resellers. Reseller is the wrong word. A few intermediaries, and they would test it with their clients. So it has to be around. It has to be used to be tested.
Okay. All right. So there's basically a delay in the timeline.
Well, the delay, we want to get it done this fiscal year, so we still have some time to meet that target. We should say that economic recovery is underway. Hey, we should talk about that the next time. The signs are definitely there. You'd have seen the PIOJ's projection for the first quarter of between 7% and 9% for the first quarter. That's the PIOJ's projection, and the early numbers are indicating that is likely to be on spot. Let's see. So that's good news, because as you know, Jamaica, when we have been hit in the past, it's taken us a long time to recover.
Yes. All right. Thanks again, Dr. Clarke.
Thank you for having me.
All the best.
Take care. Bye-bye.
And here's a recap of Dr. Clarke's main points. The Social and Economic Recovery and Vaccine SERVE program is a $60 billion initiative with two main components, health and the economy. $31 billion has been allocated under the economic component of Serve Jamaica to drive jobs and economic activity, improve productivity, and strengthen resilience. Projects under the economic component include $17.7 billion for the South Coast Highway, $8 billion for special public investment infrastructure, and $300 million for a Paint the City project. The health component will see $10.5 billion in special resources allocated to the Ministry of Health and Wellness. $6 billion is to be used for vaccines.
And that's What's in It for Me. I'm Kalila Reynolds. Till next time.
What's in It for Me was presented by the Ministry of Finance in collaboration with Kalila Reynolds Media. Follow at MOF Jamaica on social media.
Let's get this money.